Looking ahead to the next hour, I'm still here on the BBC News channel over on BBC World. It will be Lucy Hockings for you. You're watching BBC News.
You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. Ukraine says Russian forces have almost captured Severodonetsk. Ukrainian forces are holding on to just one factory where up to 500 civilians are thought to be trapped. There's a growing dispute over the transit of goods to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. Russia now warning Lithuania of serious consequences. Israel is set to hold its fifth election in 3 years. The Prime Minister has announced he'll step down from his post and dissolve Parliament. Britain's railways grind to a halt as the biggest UK rail strike in 30 years gets underway. Millions of people have been disrupted. The next half hour we'll be live in Jerusalem and have an update from our correspondents in Ukraine. A top Ukrainian government official says Russian forces have almost captured Severodonetsk. That's that key battleground city in the fight for the Donbas region. It's industrial Severodonetsk, and it's been the main focus of Russia's offences over the past few weeks. Fighting there, very intense, casualties on both sides. We do have some latest pictures from the city, and according to the Luhansk governor, Ukrainian forces are holding on to this one factory in the city. Hundreds of civilians are trapped in bomb shelters underneath. President Zelensky has said that he is worried now that Moscow will escalate attacks ahead of the EU summit this week. Joe Inwood is in Kyiv. Well, let's look at another aspect of the war in Ukraine, a row that has now erupted between the EU and Russia over Moscow's enclave, Kaliningrad. Moscow has summoned the EU ambassador a day after Lithuania banned Russia from using its railways to move sanctioned goods through its territory to Kaliningrad. This is an enclave that's strategically important. It borders both Poland, as you can see there, and Lithuania, but it was retained by Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Kaliningrad is also the main base for Russia's Baltic Fleet. Moscow says the ban breaks international law and has warned Lithuania there will be serious consequences. Here is a government official in Kaliningrad.
We still hope the mind of our neighbours will overcome the madness that they're doing now. Because, like the rest of the sanctions, this measure painfully hits on Lithuania's economy. Let's not forget that our neighbours earn good money on Kaliningrad transit.
Let's go live now to Sergei Goroshenko from BBC's Russian service. Good to see you. Can you explain a bit more about the significance of Kaliningrad? Sergei, thank you very much for joining us with more on that. A former senior member of the United Nations is calling for an external panel to investigate allegations of sexual abuse, fraud and high-level corruption at the organisation. It comes after several former members of staff have told the BBC about stories of cover-ups, harassment and bullying when they've complained about alleged wrongdoing. Some have said that they've lost their jobs after speaking out. Seema Katecha has the story. I've been speaking to John O'Brien. He worked at the UN Development Programme for 3 years before flagging his concerns about corruption with managers. The UN thanked him for raising the complaints, but subsequently opened an investigation into him. The UN denies his allegations of retaliation and say they are without merit. But I asked him about the culture at the organisation. That was whistleblower John O'Brien. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said in a statement he is open to an external review to combat misconduct of any kind, and that documentary will be airing on the BBC in future days. Let's take you now to France, where the Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne has offered her resignation to President Macron following elections which saw the government lose its majority in Parliament. However, the President has asked Mrs Borne to stay in office in the wake of Sunday's losses. Mr Macron, meanwhile, is meeting his political rivals in Paris under real pressure to secure their support to fulfil his government's reform agenda. Well, to the possibility of another election now. Israel is set to go to the polls yet again after Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said he would step down from his post and dissolve Parliament next week. The Foreign Minister Yair Lapid will take over until the vote. Live to Jerusalem, let's talk to our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell. How did it come to this time, Yolande? Yolande, thanks for joining us from Jerusalem. You're live with Lucy Hockings. Still to come, we have a report on the DJ Fatboy Slim, who is using his music to help smash the stigma around mental health. Live with Lucy Hockings. Let's take you live to Russia now. We are keeping an eye on President Vladimir Putin. Here he is addressing some military generals, as you can see. I mean, there has been an acknowledgement from the Kremlin today that there are difficulties in their fight in the east of Ukraine. Forces have regrouped after stepping up pressure, making big advances as well in Luhansk, as we were reporting on earlier in the programme. This is all ahead of that EU summit this week that is expected to welcome Ukraine's bid to join the bloc, and President Zelensky has already said he expects Russian forces to step up their attacks this week. So we're monitoring this address from President Putin to his generals, and we'll bring you the latest from Moscow shortly. To here in the UK, where the biggest strike on Britain's railways for a generation is underway, affecting millions of people. Up to 40,000 members of the RMT union are walking out for 3 days this week. Let's go live to Tim Moffat, who is at Euston Station in central London, a very empty station, normally quite busy there, Tim. Firstly, what is the strike all about? What do the strikers want? The world-renowned DJ Fatboy Slim is staging a gig with a difference, all part of a project to help people with severe mental health problems. The DJ has been honest about his own mental health and the important part that he feels music can play in helping people recover. Clara Rackham reports. And it's a big day today for the Duke of Cambridge, for Prince William. He is 40 years old. Kensington Palace has issued 3 new photographs of Prince William to mark the occasion. They were taken a couple of weeks ago when he was out selling The Big Issue in London. It's a street newspaper that helps the homeless. So he's been involved in choosing those photos to commemorate the day. A big day, turning 40. Happy birthday to him. See you in a few minutes for the headlines. Bye-bye. This is BBC World News, the latest headlines. Ukrainian officials say Russian forces have almost captured the strategic city of Severodonetsk, with Ukrainian forces holding on to just one factory. The city has been the main focus of Russia's offensives over recent weeks. The biggest UK rail strike in 3 decades is underway after last-ditch talks failed to reach an agreement. Up to 40,000 members of the RMT union are due to walk out on 3 days this week. President Macron is meeting political opponents after he and his allies lost a majority in the French National Assembly. Mr. Macron needs support from rivals to fulfill his government's reform agenda. And the Russian Nobel Peace Laureate Dmitry Muratov has auctioned his medal for more than $100 million, all to raise funding for children displaced by the war in Ukraine. You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. A Russian threat towards NATO member Lithuania. Moscow warning of serious consequences after Lithuania blocks the rail route to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. Russian forces have almost captured the strategic city of Severodonetsk. Ukrainian soldiers are holding on to just one factory with up to 500 people trapped inside. Allegations of corruption and sexual abuse at the United Nations. Whistleblowers call for an independent panel to investigate.
Right now we have a system that is actually protecting the bad guys and getting rid of the whistleblowers who are the good guys.
Britain's trains grind to a halt as the biggest UK rail strike in 30 years gets underway, disrupting millions of people.
Such a big win, I think, for, all stoners in Thailand.
And a boom in the cannabis business in Thailand after a striking turnaround in the country's laws on illegal drugs. Russia has threatened Lithuania with what it says will be serious consequences over a ban on the transport of goods through the Baltic state to the Russian territory of Kaliningrad. Moscow says it will take retaliatory measures that will have a serious negative impact on the Lithuanian population. This growing row follows Lithuania's decision to ban the transit of some goods to Kaliningrad, which is bordered only by EU countries and has no land connection to the Russian mainland. It is strategically important, retained by Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union. It is the main base as well for its Baltic fleet. The EU ambassador to Moscow, Marka Zedera, who has been summoned to the foreign ministry, says Lithuania is only implementing EU sanctions imposed over the invasion of Ukraine. Russia says the ban breaks international law. Let's bring you the response then of a government official in Kaliningrad. In the last hour, President Putin has made an appearance. We saw him meeting military graduates in Moscow, and what he said was that Russia will continue to develop and strengthen its armed forces, taking into account potential military threats and risks. And he also added that the newly tested Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, capable of carrying 10 or more nuclear warheads and decoys, would be deployed for duty by the end of the year. Let's talk now to Sergei Goroshenko from BBC's Russian service. Can I ask you, Sergei, firstly about Kaliningrad? Can you explain the background to the row? What goods normally go there? Why they're necessary? Why this is causing so much furore? Sergei, thank you so much. Well, let's bring you up to date with the fighting that is happening in Ukraine. It's raging on. A top Ukrainian official saying Russian forces have almost captured Severodonetsk, a key battleground in the fight for the Donbas. The industrial city has been the main focus of Russia's offensives over recent weeks. Fighting really intense there, casualties on both sides too. And we have some latest pictures from the city. According to the Luhansk governor, Ukrainian forces are holding on to just one factory in the city. Hundreds of civilians are trapped in bomb shelters underneath. President Zelensky has said he's worried that Moscow will escalate attacks ahead of an EU summit this week. Joe Winwood is in Kyiv for us. A former senior member of the United Nations is calling for an external panel to investigate allegations of sexual abuse, fraud and high-level corruption at the organisation. It comes after several former members of staff have told the BBC about stories of cover-ups, harassment and bullying when they've complained about alleged wrongdoing. Some have lost their jobs after speaking out. Seema Katecha reports. I've been speaking to John O'Brien, who worked at the UN Development Programme for 3 years before flagging his concerns about corruption with managers. The UN thanked him for raising the complaints, but subsequently opened an investigation into him. The UN denies John's allegations of retaliation. They say they are without merit. But I asked him about the culture at the organisation. John O'Brien, just to be clear, the UN disputes John's account of what happened, says he was never told to be quiet with his allegations, and Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has also said he is indeed open to an external review to combat misconduct of any kind. That's the response from the UN. You are live with Lucy Hockings. Still to come, the biggest rail strike in 3 decades is underway in the UK. We'll be live at what is usually a very busy train station here in London. And we'll take a look at what the coming months could bring for the global economy as the cost of living and inflation spirals around the world. You're live with Lucy Hockings. The biggest strike on Britain's railways for a generation is underway, affecting millions of people. Up to 40,000 members of the RMT union are walking out for 3 days this week. Well, let's take you live to Tim Moffat, who joins us from Euston Station in central London. Looking very empty behind you, Tim, and usually it's one of the busiest stations in England. But can you tell us why we're at this point, why the strike is taking place? Tim, thank you so much for joining us from Euston. Well, let's look at some of the causes behind the strike. You heard Tim there mention 9% inflation here in the UK and those striking being offered a 3% pay rise, which they say is not enough because of the cost of living. That argument might seem familiar to you wherever you are in the world. So let's talk now to Dr. Ethan Elzetsky, who is Associate Professor at the London School of Economics. Ethan, it is indeed a familiar picture, isn't it? There is rising inflation, rising cost of living right around the globe. Dr. Ethan Elzetsky, thank you very much for joining us. Good to get that context too of what is happening in the global economy. Thank you
for having me.
Take you to France, where the Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, has offered her resignation to President Macron. It does, of course, follow those election results, which saw the government lose its majority in Parliament. However, the President has asked Mrs. Borne to stay in office in the wake of Sunday's losses. Meanwhile, Mr. Macron is meeting his political rivals in Paris. He's under real pressure now to secure their support to fulfil his government's reform agenda. Now, if you're watching in the Northern Hemisphere right now, you might know that it is the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. And these are pictures, beautiful pictures from the World Heritage Site Stonehenge in the southwest of England. For the first time in 2 years, people have been allowed to celebrate at the site. A beautiful day here in England, so a lovely morning as well. Don't forget, if you want all the top stories here at the BBC, you can also go to the website, bbc.com/news. We're closely following events in Ukraine as well, what is happening in Severodonetsk. President Putin as well talking to his military generals today, and that threat from the Kremlin to Lithuania over the transit of goods to Kaliningrad. It's all there for you on the website as well. And there's more too on the rail strike. It's the biggest story here in the UK today, disrupting the journey times of millions of people, not just commuters as well, but people travelling to see family and friends. So everyone in the newsroom talking today about how they got to work. It really is affecting everybody, but we're following it for you on the website. You can also reach me on Twitter. I'm at Lucy Hockings BBC. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ros Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. A Russian threat towards NATO member Lithuania. Moscow warning of serious consequences after Lithuania blocks the rail route to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. Russian forces have almost captured the strategic city of Severodonetsk. Ukrainian soldiers are holding on to just one factory with up to 500 trapped civilians. The Russian Nobel Peace Laureate Dmitry Muratov auctions his medal for more than $100 million to raise funds for children displaced by the war in Ukraine.
Such a big win, I think, for all stoners in Thailand.
And a boom in cannabis in Thailand after a striking turnaround in the country's laws on illegal drugs. Russia has threatened Lithuania with what it says will be serious consequences over a ban on the transport of goods through the Baltic state to the Russian territory of Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is bordered only by EU countries and has no land connection to the Russian mainland. It is strategically important territory retained by Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union and is the main base for its Baltic fleet. Well, meanwhile, the Russian journalist and Nobel Peace Laureate Dmitry Muratov has auctioned his Nobel medal for just over $103 million to help refugees from the war in Ukraine. He won the Peace Prize alongside Maria Ressa, the Filipino journalist, last year. Mark Lebel reports. Yeah, staggering amount of money. We all want to know who the winning bidder was. To Israel now, set to go to the polls yet again, Israelis, after Prime Minister Naftali Bennett announced he's stepping down from his post and will dissolve parliament next week. The Foreign Minister Yair Lapid will take over until the vote. Here's the BBC's Yolande Nell. The Director General of the International Air Transport Association, Willie Walsh, has called for calm, saying he's confident the industry will overcome recent problems, but he has conceded some airlines may have to adjust capacity to cope with staff shortages. These comments come as EasyJet cabin crew announced they'll go on strike for 9 days in July to demand higher pay in Spain. Thousands of travellers are already experiencing disruptions and delays at airports across the globe as 2 years of pent-up travel demand is putting pressure on airlines and airport operators. Let's talk to Sally Geffen, who is a global aviation and travel analyst. So much to get through, Sally, but there's news in the past few hours that cabin crew in Spain for EasyJet want a 40% pay increase. We've just been talking about the rail strike here in the UK. Workers there also wanting a lot more money because of rising inflation. Are we looking at a very disrupted couple of months ahead, do you think? Sally, good to get your thoughts. It seems like we're looking at a new normal, though, when it comes to flying this summer particularly. Thank you. Rugby League has banned transgender players from women's international competition until further notice. The ruling follows a decision by swimming's world governing body, FINA, to restrict trans athletes' participation in elite events. The International Rugby League body said in a statement from their headquarters in Sydney it needed more time before finalising its transgender policy. And it's not just cycling, swimming and rugby. The president of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe, has also hinted athletics could take that route too. Here he is speaking to the BBC. Sebastian Coe. Do stay with us here on BBC World News still to come. Villagers in Cambodia catch the heaviest freshwater fish ever seen. We'll explain why it's a good sign for the Mekong River. You're live with Lucy Hockings. This year, Thailand has seen a striking turnaround in its laws on illegal drugs. Until recently, the kingdom's harsh penalties would see hundreds of foreigners locked up on long sentences. But now the government has completely legalised the use of marijuana, released thousands of prisoners, and as our Southeast Asia correspondent Jonathan Hednow reports, sparked off a boom in weed-related businesses. To Cambodia now, where villagers have caught what is thought to be the heaviest freshwater fish ever seen. Ecologists say it's a sign this section of the Mekong is still healthy, despite overfishing and pollution. Emily Brown reports. A big milestone for the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, today. He is turning 40. And Kensington Palace has issued 3 new photographs of him to mark the occasion. They're not stiff, official, formal royal portraits. They are Prince William, previously unseen images taken a few years ago of him outselling The Big Issue in London, which is a magazine that contributes and helps with the cause of homelessness. Really showing, I think, where Prince William's priorities lie as he turned 40, not just homelessness, the environment, mental health as well. The 3 issues he is very passionate about. Apparently, he is spending the day at home with Catherine and their children as well. They are, of course, moving from the country and from London to Windsor shortly. So he is having a quiet birthday at home, we understand. But happy birthday to Prince William. You've been live with Lucy Hockings. Good to have you with us. Hope you can join me again tomorrow. Bye-bye.